I'm Claire Monroe, 42, a historical preservation advisor living just outside Boston, and tonight I'm standing under the same roof that once forgot I existed. I thought maybe, just maybe this time they'd finally make room for me. Even after closing a $7 million preservation deal, I was still just the quiet one who left. They sent my sister a car and sent me a bill without even sending an invite. What they didn't know was I had already RSVP'd another way. They called it the annual Monroe Christmas Eve dinner. Formal attire, only crystal stemware polished to mirror shine, and enough silverware to make even Downton Abbey look underdressed. I used to love it when I was 12, before I realized that seats at the Monroe table came with conditions. This year the invitation never came. I found out the dinner happened through a photo posted on Cousin Taylor's Facebook. She didn't tag me, of course. Just a group shot my parents, my sister Sophie, in a red velvet dress, Aunt Valerie pouring wine. Everyone was there, everyone but me. I stared at the photo for longer than I should have, not because I didn't expect it, just because they didn't even try to pretend. No last-minute excuse, no, "Oh, Claire, we thought you were out of town." Nothing. They'd decided I no longer belonged. My phone vibrated 3 days later. Not a call, not an apology, an email. Subject line, vehicle invoice, immediate attention required. The PDF was attached. 52 Lars 31784, Mercedes-Benz GLC 300, registered to me. I stared at the screen, blinking once, twice, thinking surely this was a mistake, but the signature at the bottom wasn't mine. It was Sophie's, signed under my name. For a long moment I just sat there at my kitchen counter, coffee growing cold. My hands were steady. My heartbeat wasn't. My first instinct wasn't rage. It was silence. I didn't call them. I didn't reply. I didn't cry. Instead, I made eggs, washed the pan, ran a load of laundry. That night, I stood at the window of my apartment watching snow swirl under the streetlights and tried to remember the last time I'd felt included in something that didn't have a price tag. I couldn't. I hadn't gone home for Christmas in 4 years. Each year it got easier. But this was something different. This wasn't forgetting to loop me in. This was signing my name without asking, using my credit, sending the invoice like it was owed. I thought about calling Sophie, but I knew how that would go. She'd giggle, pretend it was a misunderstanding, say something like, "Well, you never use your credit anyway, Claire." Or worse, Mom said it was fine. Mom always said things were fine as long as Sophie got what she wanted. By New Year's Eve, the silence had stretched too far. I printed the invoice, highlighted every section where my name appeared. I didn't make a decision yet, but I left the folder open on my desk. That Sunday, I visited Aunt Valerie. We weren't especially close. She was my dad's sister, 10 years younger, the family's unofficial wild card. She'd never married, moved to Maine for a while, came back single and unapologetic. She taught art at a community college now and baked absurdly elaborate cakes for fun. Her apartment smelled like cardamom and butter. She poured me tea without asking. "You look like you haven't slept," she said, sitting across from me. "Christmas hangover. I wasn't invited." She didn't blink, just reached for a cookie and said, "Neither was I." I raised an eyebrow. She shrugged. "Robert thinks I'm too liberal. Elaine thinks I'm unrefined." She used air quotes. "Anyway, welcome to the club." I told her about the car, the invoice, the forged signature. She set the cookie down carefully. "They put it in your name." I nodded. "And you didn't authorize it?" "Of course not." She was quiet for a moment. Then softly, "That's fraud." "I know." We sat in silence. She finally spoke again. "What are you going to do? I'm not sure." She leaned forward. "You don't have to decide tonight." "But Claire, this isn't just family drama anymore. This is legal and personal." Her eyes softened. "And it's not okay." I nodded a small motion. But something in me settled, not healed, but acknowledged. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, the city muffled by snow, the silence pressing in around me. Not anger, not yet. Just the quiet realization I had been erased, quietly, deliberately, and maybe that was exactly how I'd make my return. I didn't touch the invoice again for a few days. It sat on my desk like an unspoken dare, its numbers precise, clinical, almost smug in how casual they made the theft look. $52,000. It wasn't just a car. It was the weight of every ignored birthday, every canceled invitation, every "Claire, can you help Sophie with this real quick?" that I'd swallowed for years. On Wednesday, I called the bank. I kept my voice, even told them I wanted to verify a loan document I didn't remember signing. The woman on the line was polite, efficient. She confirmed the vehicle was purchased in my name with my social, my credit, but the signature will pull the original file, she said. You'll receive a scanned copy within 24 hours. I thanked her, hung up, then just sat there. The kitchen felt too quiet. The snow outside had started again, soft and relentless, the kind that didn't look dangerous until you tried to walk through it. I opened my laptop, half-heartedly checked emails, marked a few unread out of spite, but I couldn't focus. My eyes kept flicking to the corner of the desk where the printed invoice waited, its corner curling slightly. When the email from the bank came the next morning, I opened it without hesitation. The signature was there, clear as day, Claire Monroe, but it wasn't mine. It looked like a teenager trying to mimic cursive with too much confidence. Slanted, swoopy, a dramatic loop at the end that I'd never use. And above it the date, December 10th. They'd filled it out 2 weeks before Christmas. So it hadn't been a rush. It hadn't been an emergency. It had been planned. They'd filled out the form, forged the signature, processed the deal, and still no one called me. No heads up, no apology. Just a silent assumption that I'd carry it like I always did. And then they didn't invite me to dinner. I forwarded the email to myself, saved a copy in a folder called Receipts. It felt petty, and also necessary. That Friday, I passed by a boutique near my building. In the window, they'd displayed a New Year's arrangement, white candles, golden ribbons, a small plaque that read, "Whatever you're not changing, you're choosing." I stopped in front of the window, just stood there, reading the line over and over. Whatever you're not changing, you're choosing. Back home, I poured myself a glass of water and sat at the counter. The snow had stopped leaving behind a still gray city. I took a deep breath, picked up my phone, and without thinking too hard, dialed. It rang twice. Claire Sophie's voice was chipper, like she'd just stepped out of a spa. "Hey," I said. "Did you put a car in my name?" Silence. Then, "Oh my God, is that what this is about? I was going to call you. It's just a lease. It's temporary. Dad said it'd be fine." I let the silence stretch. "I mean," she rushed on, "you weren't using your credit anyway, right? And you always say how good your score is. I thought, well, we thought it would help. You signed my name." She scoffed. "It's not a big deal, Claire. It's family." I said nothing. "I mean, if you want me to Venmo you for the first payment or something?" I hung up. No yelling, no final word, just a click. I set the phone down and stared at the wall. This wasn't just about the car. It was about entitlement, about the unspoken agreement they'd all made that I would carry the burden and they'd carry on. And I had for years, but not anymore. That night, I opened a fresh document. Not to write a letter, not to explain anything, just a list. At the top, I typed what they took without asking. I didn't mean money. I didn't mean the car. I meant birthdays. Weekends I'd flown home to babysit Sophie's kids while she got her nails done. The time I paid off Mom's dental work because she didn't want to deal with insurance. The $3,000 I loaned Dad when his investment opportunity fell through. The way they always remembered my degree but never my job title. Underneath I wrote, "They didn't invite me to Christmas. They used my name to buy a car. They assumed I'd stay quiet." Then I stopped. Because I didn't want to fill the page. I didn't want this to become a catalog of hurt. I closed the laptop. That weekend, Aunt Valerie called. "I've been thinking," she said, "about your situation." I didn't say anything. "I have a friend," she continued. "Corporate lawyer, quiet, discreet. You might want to talk to him, just to know your options." Options. It sounded almost luxurious. For years I'd accepted that family wasn't something you confronted, it was something you absorbed. But Valerie's voice had a steadiness to it, like she wasn't asking me to fight. She was asking me to choose. I agreed to meet the lawyer, just to listen, just to understand. His office was tucked behind a bookstore in Westport, wood-paneled and smelling faintly of pine. He wore wire rim glasses and didn't blink much. After reviewing the documents, he leaned back. "This is fraud," he said plainly. "It's not even borderline. You have every right to press charges or at the very least demand immediate release from the financial obligation." I nodded. "You don't have to act now," he added. "But if you want to set the wheels in motion, we can." I said nothing, but when I left, I took the packet of forms he offered me and slipped it into my bag. Outside, the sky had turned the color of steel wool. It wasn't snowing yet, but it would. I could feel it in the quiet. That night I made dinner, lit a candle, ate alone at my kitchen table without scrolling, without answering messages. And then I did something small, almost trivial. I removed myself from the Monroe family group chat. No message, no announcement. Just a quiet exit. The next morning my phone was still silent. No one noticed. Or maybe they did and chose silence too. It didn't matter, because for the first time in years I felt still. Not angry, not hurt, just ready. The first sign that the storm was coming wasn't the invoice or the silence or even Sophie's voice on the phone. It was a forwarded email from Mom. Subject line: family photo album. Updated: no message. Just a Dropbox link. Curious against my better judgment, I clicked. There they were. Photos from the Monroe Christmas dinner. All high-resolution edited, glowing with the warmth of candlelight and the illusion of closeness. My parents at the head of the table. Sophie smiling, wineglass raised. Even my childhood dog, now barely mobile, wearing a red ribbon around his neck. I scrolled through all 74 images. I wasn't in a single one. No empty seat saved for me. No passing mention in the captions. Just erasure. At the bottom, a family photo, 12 people arranged in front of the fireplace dressed in matching holiday tones, smiling into the camera like they'd won something. In the center, Sophie stood beside my parents, her hand on Mom's shoulder, Dad's arm behind her back, and beneath it the caption, "The Monroe Legacy, 2024. I closed the tab. My pulse was calm. Too calm. Later that afternoon, I got a text from Mom. "Mom, hope you're staying warm. Let me know when you've had a chance to look at the car situation. Sophie's been asking. No Happy New Year. No, we missed you. Just business." I didn't respond. A few hours later, another message came, this time from Dad. "Dad, Claire. Don't make a fuss. It's just paperwork. Let's not escalate things." Escalate? I hadn't even spoken, hadn't replied, and yet they already sensed something shifting. The next day I ran into Mrs. Ferris, the neighbor from 2 doors down, while checking my mail. She smiled. "Your sister's car is beautiful. I saw them dropping it off a few days before Christmas. Red suits her." I smiled back politely. "Yes, it's in my name, actually." She laughed, not realizing I wasn't joking. I walked back to my apartment slowly, snow crackling underfoot. That conversation stuck with me not because of Mrs. Ferris, but because of how naturally Sophie had embraced the lie. A gift car, a reward, no trace of shame, and no urgency to fix it. That night I opened my notes app. I typed, "When they act like you're difficult just because you stopped letting them take from you." Then I deleted it. Not because it wasn't true, but because it felt too easy. The following weekend, Sophie posted a story, a boomerang of her in the driver's seat of the Mercedes flashing a peace sign, captioned, "Manifestation works, babes, I watched it once, then again. No credit to anyone. No thanks. No acknowledgement of whose name was behind that lease. Just her. Glowing. Triumphant. Like the world had handed her the keys and said, 'You win.' The part that stung the most wasn't that they used me. It was how little they thought I'd do about it. I began to notice it more, not just in Sophie, but in all of them. The way Mom would phrase things like favors when they were really obligations. "You're so organized, Claire. Can you help me sort out the taxes again this year?" The way Dad would say, "You've always been the responsible one," right before handing me the problem no one else wanted to deal with. Even Aunt Valerie, for all her clarity, had once joked, "You're the designated fixer in the family. You'd make a great therapist." I used to wear that like a badge of honor. Now it felt like a weight. I didn't reply to Sophie's Instagram story. I didn't text back. But I watched, and I waited. Monday morning, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I let it go to voicemail, a man's voice clipped and professional. "Miss Monroe, this is Jacob Fenton from Ridgewood Auto Finance. Just following up on the initial installment for the GLC 300. Looks like we haven't received payment yet. Please return the call at your earliest convenience to avoid any penalties." Penalties? That was rich. I called back later that day, asked to speak with Mr. Fenton. He pulled up the account, confirmed the balance, then asked if I'd like to set up auto pay. "No," I said evenly. "I'd like to report a fraudulent application." The line went silent for a second. "I understand," he said slowly. "Can you verify which part of the application was submitted incorrectly?" I told him about the signature, the forged paperwork, the lack of consent. He didn't argue, just asked if I'd be willing to submit an affidavit. "I will," I said. After I hung up, I felt something I hadn't expected: calm. Not vindication, not satisfaction, just space. A few hours later, Sophie texted, "Sophie, did you just talk to the dealership? They're saying there's an issue with the paperwork. What are you doing? No emojis, no playful tone?" I didn't reply. 10 minutes later, Sophie Claire. "Seriously, why are you being so dramatic? This affects my insurance." Still, I said nothing. She tried one more time. "Sophie, fine. You want the car back? Take it. But don't act like this isn't overreacting." It was fascinating watching the entitlement morph into annoyance, then panic. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of what she'd done, only irritation that I'd disrupted the story she'd told herself, that I was quiet, compliant, invisible. She was starting to realize I wasn't. The next message didn't come from Sophie, it came from Mom. "Mom Claire, I just heard what you did." Was that really necessary? 7 words? No punctuation, not even a question mark. I stared at it for a full minute. Then I put the phone down. I didn't owe them a justification. They'd never asked why I'd stayed quiet for so long, never wondered what it cost me to keep playing the peacekeeper while they redrew the family map without me in it. They only cared now because their comfort had been disturbed. The car wasn't the issue. The car was the symbol of all the times they'd moved my boundaries without asking, redefined the rules, expected gratitude when they offered crumbs, and guilted me when I didn't smile big enough in return. That weekend, Aunt Valerie invited me over again. This time she had 2 glasses of wine already poured when I arrived. "I'm guessing it's escalated," she said, handing me a glass. "They think I'm overreacting." She tilted her head. "Well, you are reacting. That's new." I gave a dry laugh. We sat for a while, the fireplace crackling faintly behind us. Valerie never pushed. She just made space. After a while I asked, "Did they do this to you too? Make you feel like stepping back was selfish?" She looked at me for a long time, then said, "They make you feel invisible and then resent you for not clapping when they shine." I nodded slowly. She took a sip of wine. "You're not wrong for drawing the line. Just be ready, they only notice when it inconveniences them." The next morning I checked the dealership account again. The balance had been cleared, not by me. There was no note, no explanation, but I knew what that meant. Sophie had paid it, or more likely Mom and Dad had quietly behind the scenes to make it go away. Not out of guilt, out of strategy. They weren't sorry. They were trying to reset the board. But the thing is, I wasn't playing anymore, and they hadn't even noticed I'd stopped. The Monroe estate had a sound to it, one I hadn't heard in years but knew instantly. It wasn't loud, just composed. The quiet of wealth, the hush of carpeted hallways, the distant clink of glassware, the muffled voices in rooms with too much space between the furniture. I arrived on a Thursday morning in mid-January, invited not by my parents, of course, but by Victor Jang. Victor was Dad's business associate, real estate mogul, rumored buyer of the Monroe estate. He'd called 2 days prior. "Claire," he'd said warmly, "your parents are preparing the paperwork for the Boston property transfer. Since your name's on one of the historical deeds, I'd appreciate it if you could stop by to confirm a few details." I hadn't known I was still on any deeds, but I said yes, not because I wanted to see them, But because this time they couldn't shut the door without me, I walked in through the back entrance where staff and vendors usually came. The marble floor was as cold as I remembered. The walls were still lined with portraits of Monroe men, my grandfather, my father, even one of my great-uncle Harold, who'd once told me women shouldn't handle legacy. Sophie's voice floated from the sitting room. "No, Mom, the velvet one." The navy made me look washed out in that lighting. I paused, just out of view. Mom's reply came quickly. "You looked stunning in both, sweetheart. Don't overthink it." Their voices were light, casual, like the past few weeks hadn't happened, like there wasn't a scorched trail of silence behind us. I took a step forward. Mom spotted me first. Her smile faltered for just a second before she composed herself. "Claire," she said, with a tone that mimicked warmth but lacked depth. "You're early." "I'm on time," I said. Sophie turned around, blinked. "Wow. Look who finally shows up." I ignored her. Victor appeared from the hallway, smiling like we were all just one big, happy family. "Claire," he said, "thanks for coming. Can I show you the documents?" I nodded and he gestured toward the study. As I walked past Mom and Sophie, neither of them moved. They just watched. I didn't flinch. I didn't greet them. In that moment, I knew I wasn't here to be included. I was here because they had no choice. Victor led me into the study, a cavernous room filled with old leather and the smell of paper aged by privilege. The fireplace was lit, but the warmth didn't quite reach. I noticed the silver-framed photo on the side table, Dad, Sophie, and Mom arms, linked at a charity gala. I wasn't in that one either. He handed me a folder. "This is just a standard release for your portion of the deed," he said. "You'll still be listed in the historical record, of course, but the transfer won't proceed without your signature." I flipped through the pages, pretending to read each one carefully, but I was already focused on something else. On page 3, in the margin, someone had handwritten Sophie to be present during signing, for optics. I traced the line with my finger. Victor cleared his throat. "Your father asked if Sophie could be included in this meeting. Something about maintaining the narrative." I looked up. "Narrative?" He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. He said it might be good to show unity. Press will be present later. Ah, of course. A family united on paper, in photos, in press releases, but not in practice. Still, I signed the necessary form, deliberately, one stroke at a time. Then I slid the pen back across the desk. Victor raised an eyebrow. "You're not going to read the entire thing. I've read enough Monroe contracts to know they're only airtight when it benefits Sophie," I said calmly. He gave a soft, almost reluctant chuckle. "You've always been sharp." I nodded, stood up. I didn't forget. As we walked back toward the sitting room, the hallway smelled faintly of cinnamon, probably the housekeeper baking for the press-friendly segment of today's estate announcement. Sophie was sitting in a high-backed armchair, scrolling through her phone. When she saw me, she didn't smile. "Did you sign it?" she asked. I did. She looked at Mom, who gave a tight nod as if that resolved something. I stood there for a second, letting the silence stretch. Then I turned to Victor. "One more thing. I'd like a copy of the final sale paperwork once the transfer's complete." Sophie scoffed. "Why, it's not like you're part of it anymore." I looked directly at her. "Because my name built part of this house, even if you rewrote the story." She blinked. Just once. Victor said nothing, but he didn't look surprised. And neither did Mom. Because for the first time I wasn't asking. I was stating. After the signing, I lingered outside the study while the others drifted toward the conservatory. There was champagne being poured, light music playing from hidden speakers, and a photographer quietly snapping candids for the estate's farewell press kit. I didn't join them. Instead, I walked to the far end of the hall, where the old library door sat cracked open. Inside the room was untouched, still layered in dust and thick curtains with the same uneven rug, and the grandfather clock that chimed 3 minutes late. It had been my favorite place growing up, mostly because no one else ever used it. It was the one room in the Monroe estate that felt mine. On the back shelf, I found what I was looking for, a box labeled Archives, Claire. Inside were pieces of my life that someone had once deemed worth saving: school reports, old essays, childhood sketches. There was even a framed article from my college newspaper where I'd written about women and legacy in old money families. I held it in my hands for a long time. Then footsteps. I turned as Aunt Valerie stepped into the room. She must have arrived while I was with Victor. Her eyes landed on the box. "They almost threw that out last spring," she said softly. "Figures." She walked closer, her heels muted by the thick carpet. "I asked them to keep it. I thought maybe one day you'd want to see what they tried to forget." I nodded, not trusting my voice. Valerie looked around the room, her gaze lingering on the dust-covered table. "You know, your grandfather once told me this house would never belong to a woman. Said it'd fall apart if it did." I gave a soft laugh. "It's being sold anyway." "Exactly," she said. Funny how things turn. We stood there for a while. No rush, no need to fill the silence. Before she left, she placed a folded piece of paper on the bookshelf beside me. "If you ever decide to tell your story, really tell it. Call this number," she said. "He's a publisher. Owes me a favor." I looked at the paper but didn't touch it. When I finally left the estate that afternoon, no one walked me out. No one asked where I was going. I stepped through the same back door I'd entered, holding the archive box under one arm. As I reached my car, I heard laughter from the conservatory. Distant, unbothered. I paused just for a second. Then I opened my trunk, placed the box inside, and shut it gently. It was the first thing I'd taken from that house in years that actually belonged to me, and this time I wasn't leaving it behind. Ban ko tich tin kach nai kong. It was early February when the envelope arrived, thick, heavy stock paper. No return address. Just my name, handwritten in blue ink across the center, Claire Monroe. I opened it carefully, expecting some follow-up from the estate closing, but instead inside was a single document. Invoice. Vehicle, lease, transfer, and fees amount, due 52 143 bonds and 28, payable to Monroe Family Trust, due date February 28th. At the bottom was a note typed "not signed," as previously agreed reimbursement for Sophie Monroe's vehicle lease and related costs. Prompt payment appreciated. No greeting, no context, no signature, just an assumption that I would see this and fold. I stared at the page, the corners of it trembling slightly in my fingers, not from fear but from something sharper, something colder. They were still rewriting the narrative, not just excluding me, but now recasting me as the one who owed them. I placed the invoice on the counter and walked to the window. Outside, the snow had finally stopped. A rare beam of sunlight angled across the neighboring rooftops, making the world seem deceptively still. I picked up my phone, not to call them, not to reply, but to take a picture of the invoice. Then I opened an email draft and addressed it to Victor Yang. Subject for your records: Monroe transfer fallout. I attached the image, wrote one line: "You may want to see how your partners handle post-deal communication." Then hit send. I didn't expect him to respond, but I knew he'd read it. That same evening I received a message from an unknown number. Unknown. "They're burning bridges they didn't even know you built. Call me if you want options." I didn't reply. Not yet, but I kept the number. 3 days later, I received a voicemail from Dad. "Claire, I assume you got the invoice. It's just protocol. Nothing personal. Let's not make a mess of things. Protocol, like forging my name on a car lease, like sending a bill instead of an apology." I didn't return the call. Instead, I pulled out the archive box Aunt Valerie had saved and began sorting through the contents. Each paper, each picture, each fading letter reminded me that I'd never truly been invisible, I'd only been filed away. One folder caught my eye: college, internship letters. I remembered them. Letters of recommendation I'd written for myself and had Dad sign because he was too busy to draft his own. The memory stung less than it used to. Now it just confirmed the pattern. They wanted the benefit of me without the presence of me. That weekend I met Aunt Valerie for coffee. We sat in a quiet corner booth of a small cafe in Beacon Hill, where the windows fogged up just enough to make the world outside feel far away. "I got an invoice," I said, sliding the paper across the table. She read it without blinking. They're doubling down. They're rewriting history. She looked up, so rewrite it back. I raised an eyebrow. Valerie reached into her purse and pulled out a business card. This is the contact I mentioned. He works in estate ethics, helps families navigate legacy disputes. Quietly. Quietly. She smirked. Just because it's silent doesn't mean it's weak. I turned the card over in my hand. The name read Graham Ellison, Legal Strategist, Heritage and Reputation. I slipped the card into my coat pocket without a word. We finished our coffee. She didn't press. That night, I Googled Graham. He wasn't flashy. No Twitter, no website. But a handful of articles mentioned his name in whispered circles cases, where reputations shifted assets, realigned, and influence changed hands without a headline. Silent power. I sent him an email. Mr. Ellison, I was referred by Valerie Monroe. I believe I'm being rewritten out of my family's legacy under the guise of protocol. I'd like to discuss what quiet accountability might look like. He replied within 2 hours. Short, direct, tomorrow, noon. My office. Come alone. I stared at the screen, then closed my laptop. This wasn't about vengeance. It was about correction. Graham Ellison's office was in a converted brownstone tucked between 2 art galleries in Cambridge. No nameplate on the door, just a subtle brass number and an old bell that chimed once when I pushed it open. Inside the space was minimalist exposed brick, a single long bookshelf, and one framed quote behind his desk: "Silence is not absence. It is presence perfected." He looked up as I entered. Mid-50s, crisp gray suit, eyes like polished steel. "You're Claire," he said. Not a question. I nodded. He gestured to the chair across from him. "Valerie said you're not looking to make noise. I'm looking to stop being erased." He nodded once. "Good. Because making noise is cheap. Being undeniable, that takes precision." He opened a folder already on his desk. "I've reviewed the estate documents. You were on the original preservation trust, which means your signature was necessary for that sale to proceed. They didn't mention that to the buyer until you were already looped in. That's why Victor called me." "Yes, and your cooperation gave them cover, but they overplayed their hand with the invoice." "That's where things get interesting." He pulled out another sheet. "This is a pattern. You're not the first Monroe they've tried to sideline. Your grandfather's sister was quietly written out of the inheritance decades ago. It was covered under moral character clauses." Valerie gave me the details. I sat back. "Let that sink in." Graham leaned forward. "I'm not suggesting litigation. I'm suggesting leverage. What kind of leverage? Legacy events, public filings, press proximity. Your name doesn't just exist in records, it exists in the memory of this estate. And if we reassert that name carefully, visibly, there's no unerasing it." I didn't speak for a moment. "Then I don't want revenge. I just don't want them to be allowed to act like I was never here." He gave a slight smile. "Then we'll make sure the silence around you gets too loud to ignore." He handed me a single page, a timeline of suggestions. "Start with the gala," he said. "The Preservation Society holds it next month. You were a former youth speaker, correct?" I nodded. "Your reappearance there, quietly invited by the society itself, sends a message. No need to confront anyone. Just be undeniable." I folded the page. Outside, as I stepped back into the wind, I felt something shift, not in them but in me. This wasn't about shouting my name into rooms that had closed their doors. It was about walking into new rooms where silence still held weight and letting them realize I'd been in the story all along. The Preservation Society Gala was held on the last Saturday of February at the Boston Public Library's Courtyard Tea Room, a place that always made legacy feel tangible. Carved limestone chandeliers dripping in crystal, and a guest list curated like fine china, old, expensive, and rarely touched. I hadn't been invited to the gala in years, but this time the invitation came with my full name embossed across thick cardstock: Ms. Claire Monroe, former youth contributor, 1997 speaker, Women and Heritage. That title, I hadn't heard it in decades, but someone, probably Valerie or maybe even Graham, had made sure it was remembered. I arrived just before 7 dressed in a simple black gown with a high neckline and subtle pearl earrings. No brand name flash, just presence. The kind that didn't need announcing. As I stepped inside, I saw Sophie almost immediately. She was in full Monroe mode emerald dress, camera-ready makeup standing next to Dad, who was speaking with a board member near the donor wall. They didn't see me. Not yet. I checked in at the registration table. The woman scanned the list, smiled politely. "Ah, Claire Monroe, you're at table 3, right up front." Front, of course. That was Graham's doing. From across the room, Victor Yang caught my eye. He raised his glass slightly. No wave, just acknowledgement. I nodded back, then made my way through the crowd. People turned as I passed, not all at once, but in that slow ripple that starts when someone unexpected appears in a place you thought you controlled. I didn't seek them out, Mom, Dad, Sophie. I didn't need to, because within minutes, the MC took the mic to begin the welcome speech, and the seating shuffle brought it all together. Tonight, she said brightly, we honor not only the history of this city, but the women who've shaped its preservation. One such woman is among us tonight, our 1997 Youth Honoree, whose speech, Women and Heritage, the Unwritten Names, still echoes in our archives. Please welcome Claire Monroe. There it was. A single spotlight turned toward table 3. My table. I stood slowly. Didn't smile, didn't wave. Just nodded once toward the stage, then sat back down. The applause was light, at first uncertain. Then it grew, and I felt the shift. I didn't need to say anything. The room had remembered me before my family did. Across the room, my mother's smile froze. Just a flicker, but I caught it. The kind of pause that happens when the script changes mid-performance and the actors forget their next line. Dad leaned in, whispering something to Sophie, who didn't look at him. Her eyes were locked on me, her lips parted just slightly. She wasn't angry, she was confused, as if the math didn't add up. Claire, on stage, acknowledged. That wasn't the version they'd written. Dinner was served shortly after, and I returned to a low hum of conversation. The tablemates around me, an archivist, a city planner, and a woman from a local university, smiled warmly. "You really made an impression back in '97, the planner said. I was in the room. I was just a kid with too many opinions, I replied lightly. That's usually how the important ones start. We talked through the first course. Not about my family, not about the estate, just Boston history preservation stories that mattered. It felt clean. No barbs, no agendas. At one point, I excused myself and walked to the side hall that led toward the courtyard. That's where Dad found me. He approached with the same expression he used in boardrooms, half smile, no warmth. "Didn't know you were speaking tonight," he said. I didn't. He frowned. "That spotlight wasn't mine," I said. "It was theirs." He paused. "You're making a statement." "I'm making a presence," I corrected. For a beat, we just stood there. Then he said, "Sending that invoice, that was handled poorly." I didn't reply. "And Victor," he trailed off, his jaw flexing, "I assume this is his idea." "No," I said, "this is mine." He gave a short, incredulous laugh. "You've always liked the dramatic." I looked past him toward the courtyard's tall glass windows where guests were mingling with champagne. "This isn't drama," I said quietly. "It's just the truth reintroduced." He looked like he wanted to say more, but he didn't. Instead, he stepped aside and walked back toward the main room. I stayed a moment longer, let the quiet settle, then returned to the gala without fanfare, without invitation, just as myself. After dessert, the gala shifted into what the committee called Legacy Acknowledgements, a series of thank yous for donors, volunteers, and longtime contributors. It was the kind of segment where people politely clapped while sipping coffee, already half focused on what came next. But when they announced the upcoming Restoration Fund and named me as one of its founding advisors, there was no mistaking the shift in the room. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, but heads turned. My name, Claire Monroe, was being spoken from a podium my parents used to stand behind, but this time it wasn't followed by daughter of or in connection with, just my name, my contribution. No footnotes. I caught Sophie watching me from across the room. She wasn't pretending anymore. Her smile was gone. Her wineglass hung loosely from her fingers. She looked unsettled. Not because I had said something outrageous, but because I hadn't said anything at all. After the applause, I stood to leave. No lingering, no second rounds. On my way out, I passed Victor by the check-in table. He gave me a subtle nod. "Well played," he murmured. I didn't answer, just kept walking, out into the night air. A light snow had started to fall, soft quiet, like the story resetting itself. When I reached my car, I paused before unlocking the door. Behind me, the doors of the library opened again. I turned slightly. It was Sophie. She didn't say anything right away. Just stood there, heels slightly unsteady on the cobblestone. "You could have told me you'd be here," she said finally. "I wasn't sure I would be," I replied. She looked down. "Then you made Mom look small in there." "No," I said gently. She did that herself. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. "You're different now," she said almost to herself. "No," I repeated. "I'm just visible." We stood there in silence for a moment, snow drifting between us. Then she said the quiet part out loud. "They listen to you." I didn't reply, because that right there, that was the moment. Not anger, not confrontation, just realization. Sophie looked away first. "Good night, Claire." I watched her go, didn't call her back, didn't soften it. I simply opened my door, got in, and drove off into the stillness. No horns, no spotlight, just the sound of tires on snow and a name they could no longer erase. Spring arrived late that year. The crocuses pushed through still frosted soil like they weren't sure they had permission. By April, the final paperwork for the estate settlement was quietly filed. No lawsuits, no press, but changes. My name was reinstated on the family trust documents. The preservation board formalized my advisory role, and most tellingly, the $52,000 invoice vanished, no explanation, no apology. It just ceased to exist. The silence said everything. I moved back into a small loft in Beacon Hill. Nothing extravagant: brick walls, tall windows, a faint smell of old books in the hallways. It reminded me of who I used to be before I spent years contorting myself to be palatable. Now I wasn't aiming for palatable. I was aiming for accurate. Aunt Valerie visited on a Sunday morning in May. She brought lemon scones and a folded newspaper. On the front page of the Metro section was a photo from the gala. I hadn't even noticed the photographer. There I was standing beside a preservation mural, hands calmly clasped, gaze focused somewhere off frame. The caption read, "Claire Monroe returns to Preservation Gala as advisor and early contributor to 2024 Legacy Fund. No daughter of, no surprise guest, just a name, a role, a fact." Valerie placed the paper down between us. "You rewrote the narrative," she said simply. "No," I replied. "I just started reading aloud the parts they skipped." She smiled. "Your mother's been quiet. Good. Your father," I sipped my tea. "He started BCCing me on family business emails again." Valerie chuckled. "That's his version of repentance." "I'll take it," I said, with a footnote. After she left, I opened my laptop. An email waited from the Preservation Society. They wanted me to speak at the fall conference, this time not as a former honoree, but as a keynote. I stared at the screen for a long time, then clicked reply. 2 words: I accept. Not to prove anything, not to claim space, just to continue existing fully and clearly in places I had once been erased. 2 weeks later, I received a cream-colored envelope in the mail, hand-addressed Monroe family crest faintly embossed in the corner. Inside was an invitation. Spring gathering, family lawn brunch, Sunday at noon, Monroe Estate Garden. No apology, no note, just the formality of inclusion. I left it on the counter for 3 days, walked past it, poured coffee next to it, didn't touch it. Then I placed it in the trash without folding it. Some invitations are just reminders that they used to forget you. On Sunday, I didn't go. Instead, I took the train down to Provincetown, rented a bike, and spent the afternoon riding along the dunes where the wind didn't ask who I was related to. I ate lunch alone at a cafe run by a woman named Jules, who remembered my name by the second visit. That was the kind of recognition I was keeping now, quiet, earned, unentangled. When I got home that evening, there were no missed calls, no voicemails, just an inbox with 2 messages. One from the conference coordinator confirming my keynote slot, the other from Sophie. Subject line about today. I hesitated before opening it. Inside, a single sentence. They asked where you were. I said you were busy being visible. I stared at it longer than I needed to. No reply, no heart emoji, just read, and left alone. It was enough. Later that week, I attended a board session for the Preservation Fund. Victor was there, along with the usual members. When the chair asked if I'd be willing to lead the next subcommittee, something my mother had chaired for a decade, I accepted without pause. Not to take it from her, just to make sure it was never taken from someone else again. That evening, I passed the mirror by my front door on the way out. I stopped, looked, and for the first time in years, I didn't see someone returning from exile. I saw someone who had simply never left. A few days later, I walked past the Monroe estate. Not intentionally. I'd taken a detour through the back bay after a meeting ran long. The sun was low, and the light hit the old brick facade in a way that made it almost soft. The garden gates were open. There were folding chairs on the lawn, the remnants of the spring gathering, still visible napkins caught in bushes, a child's toy left near the pond petals scattered like polite confetti. I didn't go in. Didn't need to. From the sidewalk, I could see the back terrace where we used to sit, Mom with her posture-perfect lemonade, Dad flipping through property tax reports. Sophie used to chase fireflies with a glass jar, barefoot and fast. I stood for a moment, letting the memory play out without bitterness. Then I turned to leave. That's when I saw her. Beverly, my mother. She was standing at the top of the steps, hands clasped in front of her, looking not at me, but beyond me. Not surprised, not smiling, just still. For a second I thought about nodding, offering that tiny civility that said we see each other. But I didn't, not out of malice, out of clarity. This moment wasn't about being seen. It was about no longer waiting for it. I turned without pause and kept walking. Half a block later, my phone buzzed. A message from Victor. You were right. The silence says more. I smiled and kept walking. The streets were quiet. Boston always had a strange peace at dusk when ambition settled for the night and the city exhaled. As I rounded the corner toward home, a neighbor waved from her porch. Evening, Claire. Not Ms. Monroe, not Robert's daughter, just Claire. I waved back, unlocked my door, and stepped inside a life that finally belonged only to me. No signatures needed, no invoices sent, no seats begged for, just presence, steady, unapologetic, and permanent. They never said sorry, and I never asked. Some things don't need to be spoken out loud to be understood. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is show up, quietly, unshaken, and let the silence fill with truth. I didn't win a battle. I didn't reclaim a throne. I simply walked back into the room they pretended I didn't belong in and stood still long enough for them to see what they missed. Not louder, just clearer.